they had, and then, of course, other factors, the amount of ammunition they had, the amount of equipment that they had.
All right. Stephen Zalaga is the author of Panzer Grenadier versus U.S. Armored Infantrymen, European Theater of Operations, 1944, out in paperback now. Stephen, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
Phone lines open, team, 888-900-3393. We'll be right back.
This is the Buck Sexton Show.
The Blaze Radio Network.
This is the Buck Sexton Show.
Very interesting exchange last night on the Tucker Carlson show, Tucker Carlson Tonight on Fox News. And very interesting exchange between Tucker and Jonathan Gruber. You know, the one who's like, the stupidity of the American people is like an advantage. That guy. Tucker was pushing back on a whole bunch of things that Gruber was trotting out there. I wanted to play this exchange for you, then we'll dig into a bit more.
I thought this law was supposed to help everybody. This law was never supposed to help everybody, Tucker. That wasn't the design. The law was actually explicitly designed first in Massachusetts and then for the nation to leave the vast majority of Americans alone. People who had health insurance that worked for them through their employer or the government were not designed to be affected by this law, by and large, in the near term. They were hoped to benefit in the long term through lowering costs. But in the near term, the law was designed to fix what was wrong with our system, which was focused on the 20% of Americans who did not have health insurance or were buying it through a broken non-group insurance system. The design was not, and that was the design of the law.
Okay, so that's not at all what I heard the president at the time say, at all, and I was there. But, okay, fine point. Let me ask you, this is my sanity test. Are you really saying there are no victims of this law?
No, not at all. I'm not saying
so
that.
Who are the victims? Who's been hurt by Obamacare?
Here you go. Who are the victims?
This is good.
Good.
Obamacare is two groups. One is the wealthiest Americans, the top 2% of Americans who had to pay new taxes. And second is very healthy individuals who benefited from a previously discriminatory insurance market.
Stop. Healthy people benefited from a discriminatory insurance market. Oh. You mean if you're young and healthy, you could buy a plan that wouldn't necessarily cover you for much unless you had catastrophic injury? He's admitting to you, and it's amazing. You should go and listen to the whole interview because of the language that Gruber uses. There's a lot of nonsense piled in there. But he is admitting to you that this is all just a cost-shifting mechanism, that this is redistribution of wealth via the healthcare system. And another excellent – so watch the whole Tucker interview last night with Gruber, because Tucker gets him on a few very key points. This notion that it wasn't designed for – why does it have to affect the whole healthcare system then? Why was it – I forget how many thousands of pages now, over 1,000 pages, 3,000 pages, 1,000, too many pages. Why would it have all of that? What's the purpose? What's the point? Why would it need to affect so much of the insurance market if it's only for those people? It's about a lot more than that, isn't it? And for the 17 million or 20 million, whatever the number is, their quote, they say 30. That's not true. But the 17 million people that get their insurance via Obamacare in some direct capacity, a majority of them get Medicaid, which is insurance for the poor, and that's a vast majority of them. So they just expanded Medicaid. So that's just free. That just means the government's paying your medical bills now. And then for the rest of them, they have these plans bought on exchanges that are just really bad. And various lobbyists, and Tucker got to this later in the interview, various lobbyists have made sure that their services for their particular industry or their sector of the healthcare industry are covered. So there was a big giveaway effect for a lot of the players in the insurance market that were able to get a seat at the table and make sure that their services would be covered. And then they force people on the exchanges to buy those plans that force them to cover things they don't want to cover. So that's also a part of this. Excellent piece as well, I would recommend for all of you at AnnCoulter.com, or she's syndicated in a whole bunch of different newspapers. But she talks about what it's like to be. I didn't realize that Ann was on Anne had to buy because she's somebody who doesn't work for a big employer. She works for herself, which is very nice. But she's had to buy Obamacare plans. And she points out that, first of all, the people that are working to pay for these terrible plans aren't able to go and march and complain about how their health care stinks. I think that's a very important point that she makes. And then she talks about who really gets benefits from this. She's paying huge premiums. I know some of you, because of Anne and the whole Trump thing, have issues with her analysis of late. I think she's great. And I think you should check out her piece, because no matter what she says about Obamacare, everyone needs to know. If you don't personally have any experience with Obamacare, you'll read this and you'll be terrified of it. She's had to change her plan 3 times because they keep shifting around what's an acceptable plan and what's not. And, of course, the government that puts the Obamacare out there, they won't live under Obamacare. So we all know that there's a hypocrisy that this entire thing is built on in the first place. And she just goes to town on it, says that you're paying, in her case, like $700 a month for a plan that no doctors will take, that you want to go see. And you're paying $700 a month, and your deductible is like $7,000 or $8,000. So you're paying a lot of money. You can't see the doctors you want to see. And if you do get sick, unless you get catastrophically sick, and then, by the way, you're still not going to the hospital you want to go to or seeing the doctor you want to see, you're $7,000 or $8,000 out of pocket before they kick in anything. And you have no choice. You're forced to buy into this. This is why people hate Obamacare. And Gruber, in the interview with Tucker last night, was saying, well, it's because people don't know enough about it. No, I think they know plenty about it. It's garbage. It is crap. You know, a big part of all this, the mentality behind Obamacare, are 2 things. One is the soak the rich, other people should pay for health care mentality, which the middle class is actually paying for the health care of the poor. That's where the majority of, when you look at the pinch of Obamacare and who's paying their higher premiums. And yeah, if you're making $10 million a year, you don't care about the Obamacare tax. But if you're not getting a subsidy and you're in the individual market and you're just a working person, you do care about the Obamacare tax or the Obamacare mandate. And which really is a tax, right? That's what we found out. You can either pay the government a fee in the form of taxation, or you can get a crappy plan. But this needs to go away. This is very bad. And another part of this, and I don't have time to elaborate on it right now, it's just the government pretending they can shield people from bad decisions. You know, if you want to buy a plan where you cover the first $5,000 of your health expenses year in, year out, but anything above that, you've got a really good plan, you should be able to do that. You should be able to do that. The government shouldn't be calling all these shots for you. So, yeah, there we have it. Team, we got a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. 888-900-3393. Hour 2, just a few minutes.
You're listening to Buck Sexton on the Blaze Radio Network. Now, spreading freedom across the nation. This is
The Buck Sexton Show.
All right, Team Buck, welcome back to the Freedom Hut. Our friend Guy Benson joins now. He's a Fox News contributor. He is the politics editor at townhall.com, author of End of Discussion. Guy, great to have you.
Hello, Buck. How are you?
Good, man. Good to hear from you. Let's talk a bit about the Supreme Court nominees that Trump is considering. You have a piece up on townhall.com right now that lists where we are here. It was 3 names and then there were 2. Is that where we are?
Well, that was what we heard, but I'm not sure that that's exactly accurate necessarily at this point. So there were a few different reports floating around over the last couple of days. One of them came from Politico, which said basically, yeah, they're down to 2. But I ended up bumping into Leonard Leo, who's a legal scholar, a law professor, Federalist Society guy who has been an advisor to the Trump administration and the Trump transition on Supreme Court questions and this whole nomination process. I ran into him yesterday at Fox in the green room in D.C., and I said, hey, I saw there's, in addition to the Politico story in which Leo was quoted several times, there was a CBS News report that it was down to just 2 names, and that William Pryor, who's sort of a rock-ribbed conservative justice who had been, or jurist, who had been filibustered by Democrats during the Bush administration and eventually got through on a very close vote. CBS had reported that he was sort of out of the running and it was down to 2 other potential candidates. I asked Leo if that was true, and he sort of shook his head no, and he said that he thought that was, quote, a stretch. So as far as I know, based on the publicly reported information and based on my conversation with Leo, who seems like a pretty well-positioned guy to be in the know, there are still 3 names as finalists on the table, although I'll just add parenthetically, Buck, that we're talking about Donald Trump, so you can't necessarily take any of this reporting to the bank. There could be a dark horse and a surprise in the wings, but I think based on what we know, it will likely be one of these 3.
And what do we know about the 3?
Well, we know that so you've got William Pryor, who's a hardcore conservative. You have Neil Gorsuch. I'm not exactly 100% sure how to say some of these names, but it's Gorsuch. He is on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals based out in Colorado. And then there's a 3rd Circuit Court of Appeals judge, Thomas Hardiman. So those are the 3. Based on what I've read, I've read a little bit on SCOTUS blog and a few other analyses. I also talked at length with Leonard Leo, about the other 2, because I think William Pryor is a relatively known commodity. He was at the center of the big judge battles of the mid-2000s under Bush, like 2004, 2005, with the filibusters and the Gang of 14. He was one of those controversial people that was being blocked endlessly by the Democrats, and eventually the Gang of 14 resolved that situation. Of course, subsequently, Harry Reid blew up the filibusters, so things have changed since then. But to give you a sense of Pryor, he once led a prayer publicly which ended with the pleading to God. He said, please, God, no more suitors. Meaning Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices who sort of go wobbly and lefty once they reach the Supreme Court. So I don't think it's particularly ambiguous about what type of justice Pryor would be. So then if you're a conservative who wants, a strong sort of, constitutionalist on the bench, do you have any reason to be concerned about if Gorsuch or Hardiman gets the nod? Again, based on I am not a hardcore court watcher. I don't have in-depth knowledge, but I've done some homework on this and had some conversations. I don't get the sense that any of these 3 are in any danger of being a future David Souter type of justice. They have, at this point, pretty substantial judicial records. There's a paper trail, there's opinions, and they're all consistently constitutionalist conservatives. And the one thing I would say is that Gorsuch, the more I hear about Gorsuch, the more I like him. Again, he's on a circuit court based out in the Mountain West, the 10th Circuit, and he has been compared many, many times to Justice Scalia, not just because of his judicial philosophy, but also because he's apparently an excellent, brilliant writer who writes very colorful, powerful opinions, which Scalia was famous for. So if you're looking for someone who's just sort of a second coming of Antonin Scalia, you can never replace the great man. But Gorsuch seems to be, would be, I think, a really good selection. And I should also add, he's 49 years old. He's under the age of 50. Of the 3, they're all young. They're all under 55. He's the youngest.
So if this actually goes through, if this happens, it's something for conservatives to celebrate. I know that and Guy, you were very open about how you felt during the primary and the general about the concerns you had with the Trump presidency. I feel